So as someone who covers iPad news on a regular basis, I've pretty much been keeping up with the latest about this upcoming iPad Pro refresh in March. And if you've been on this channel for a while, you might know that I've covered a bunch of really odd leaks across the last few months. For example, we had rumours about the iPad Pro gaining OLED in 2022. We've also had rumours about Apple killing off the 11-inch size, and all these really fishy leaks that I've kind of dismissed, but now we have a new report from Mac Otakara, who has kind of given me an epiphany. Because guys, let me tell you, we completely misunderstood what this next iPad refresh really is going to be. And so I have a theory that I think is quite credible, and that is the fact that this upcoming iPad Pro will not be a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but instead a 12.9-inch iPad Pro Max. Now, of course, it isn't certain that Apple calls this the iPad Pro Max. They could call this the iPad Pro 5G, or like the iPad with Retina display, they could call this the iPad Pro with Liquid Retina XDR, though I do think that one is unlikely. But anyways, coming back to my point, what I mean by this being an iPad Pro Max is that this is not replacing the existing lineup of iPad Pros. So the 2020 iPad Pros are staying where they are, and this iPad Pro Max will sit alongside it as an ultra premium option. So yes, you're probably very confused, and so I thought I'd explain this and break it down. And so without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe, click that notification for the latest Apple news and rumours, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. So let's go back to the report that sparked all of this in my head, and that is of course Mac Otakara's report on the iPad Pro. So yesterday, the guys over there released a report about the lower cost iPad that we can come to expect alongside this next iPad Pro refresh, a lot of what I've already mentioned in a previous video, which you can check out in the icon above. But coming back to the iPad Pro, they mentioned two key things about this next refresh. Number one is pretty obvious, to be honest, and that is there is no redesign with this next refresh of the iPad Pro. So it's going to stay identical in terms of design to the 2020 and 2018 model. But then we come to the second point, and this is the point that kind of blew my mind, and that is the fact this 12.9-inch iPad Pro that is coming out in March will not replace the existing 2020 models. Instead, this model will be an addition to the existing lineup. Essentially, in their words, this is going to be a higher-end version of the iPad Pro. And yes, I know most of you are still confused, but this actually explains so many things about the leaks and rumours we've seen in the past. For example, Jon Prosser, back in early 2020, told us that we should expect a 5G version of the iPad Pro that should come out by the end of 2020. And of course, now in 2021, we know that didn't happen at the end of 2020, and so I've been wondering, whatever happened to this 5G version of the iPad Pro? Well, we had Jon Prosser claim a few days ago that this is going to be the model that launches in March. So this 5G 12.9-inch version of the iPad Pro with the A14X, that's going to be the one we see in a few months. And literally, in that tweet, he mentions this is going to be a half refresh to the iPad Pro lineup. Expect the full refresh in 2021. Now, of course, because of the pandemic, things have moved and dates have shifted, and so if this version that was supposed to release at the end of 2020 is releasing in 2021, it is very likely that we could see the full refresh happen in 2022 now. And that literally perfectly ties in with the rumours about the OLED iPad Pros launching in 2022. That was initially very odd to me, but now it makes sense. The OLED iPad Pros are going to be the full refresh, possibly a new design because of the OLED display and as a result, maybe thinner bezels. And so that's going to be the iPad that has the full bells and whistles. But for some reason, Apple's launching this iPad Pro Max this year as a mid-refresh to the existing lineup, and so expect the full refresh, the full replacements to come out in 2022. And literally, I mentioned in yesterday's video, which you can check out in the icon above, I said that Apple refreshes the iPad Pro lineup every 18 months. A full refresh happens every 18 months, and so it felt odd to me that Apple was releasing this iPad that would potentially replace the 12.9-inch model so soon. But now everything starts to make sense because of course that full refresh we expect every 18 months is still pretty much on track for 2022 with those OLED iPads. And another thing that's just been cleared up with this is of course the state of the 11-inch iPad Pro. We haven't heard anything about the smaller iPad Pro, and so I've kind of theorized that maybe Apple's planning to discontinue it. But we now have some information about the smaller iPad Pro that fits with this whole idea of the iPad Pro Max. So we have Maori QHD, very reliable leaker, definitely give him a follow. He mentions that his source Hades, who is 100% accurate, so they are very, very reliable. They mention that Apple's planning to adopt OLED instead of mini LED for the 11-inch iPad. That literally makes so much sense because of course, we're expecting the full refresh, the full replacements to the existing 2020 models in 2022. We already have reports that OLED iPads should be ready for 2022, and so all of this just ties in together. It just makes complete sense to me. Now, of course, a very valid question is why? Why is Apple releasing a mid-refresh to the iPad Pro lineup? Why is there even a mini LED iPad in the first place? Well, that is a good question that I don't really have an answer for. Now, if I were to maybe think of some possible theories, possibly Apple has a quota as to how many mini LED displays they use on their products, and so maybe to fill that quota, they launch a new version of the iPad Pro. And of course, we now have a specific reason as to why there was a delay with the 5G iPad Pro, because like I mentioned, the pandemic meant that Apple suppliers could not make mini LED displays, and so they've been finding difficulty in making that on a mass scale. And so the difficulty in making these displays would explain why Apple's only bring it to one high-end version of the iPad Pro. If they weren't having these issues, then presumably they'll bring it to all the versions of the iPad Pro in the lineup. Also, similarly, 5G is a thing that's taking over technology. Every device has to have 5G, and so maybe Apple has the urge and need to give the iPad Pro 5G as soon as possible, and so this refresh will possibly be all about 5G in the marketing. In fact, John Prosser in his initial tweets about this 5G iPad mentioned that this model exists because of 5G and the A14 chip is being put in this iPad to handle 5G. So yes, as stupid as it sounds, this might be the sole reason this iPad exists. Of course, this is just a theory, a tech theory, so that means there are some loopholes and there are some issues with this whole idea. Number one, the chips would just be a mess across the whole lineup. Now, the iPad lineup in terms of the chips is already very confusing, okay? But with this new iPad Pro Max, Apple would potentially have 4 different versions of their A series chips in the iPad lineup. So essentially we should have the A13 in the budget iPad, the A14 in the Air and the Mini, and then the A12Z in the Pros, which should be better than the cheaper iPads, and then we have the A14X in this iPad Pro Max. So that is a whole load of chips, and it makes the lineup extremely confusing. Another thing that seems really peculiar to me about all of this is that why didn't Apple just launch a bigger version of the iPad Pro with this mini refresh? You see, the issue with this iPad Pro Max, or this ultra premium version of this iPad, is that it's essentially still the same 12.9-inch iPad we've had for years. And so for many consumers who are looking to shop for an iPad Pro, they're going to see 2 versions of the 12.9-inch size. 2 iPads that look near identical and yet have drastically different specs. For example, one has mini LED, one has LCD, one has A14X, one has A12Z. I mean, what are all these numbers and letters? And on top of that, one has 5G, which is going to confuse the heck out of every consumer out there. And so to fit the bill as this premium high-end version of the iPad Pro, a bigger size would have been nice, because I think a lot of people looking to replace their laptops with an iPad, they would appreciate the bigger real estate, and also it would have physically distinguished this iPad Pro Max alongside the regular 2020 12.9-inch iPad Pro. And of course, there is the whole issue about price, because of course, if this iPad Pro is going to be a more expensive version, a more premium version of the iPad Pro, then is it going to be $1,100 or $1,200? And if that is the case, then that's going to be quite a lot of money for most people to spend on an iPad. And so I'm not sure if mini LED and 5G and a slightly faster chip is enough to get people to pay a higher price. And to add to the confusion, we have Ross Young claiming that no, this will not be the case. Apple's going to be using OLED on the 10.9-inch size, and mini LED will be something for the 12.9-inch size. So two different versions of display tech for each size. That makes zero sense. I mean, we all know OLED is the better tech, and so why would Apple give the better display tech to the smaller model? Also, it's very interesting he says 10.9 inches because that's the size of the iPad Air. The iPad Pro is 11 inches, the iPad Air is 10.9 inches, and so maybe Apple is planning to kill the 11-inch size and maybe they will give OLED to the iPad Air. That also makes zero sense. I am now just back to square one because I am now very, very confused. Anywho, let's dismiss that and come back to my original theory. I think this high-end version of the iPad Pro is what we're seeing at the end of March. It's probably going to be called the iPad Pro Max, and that's basically what I think. But let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of all these leaks? What kind of theory do you have? Do you think Apple is going to give us a 12.9-inch iPad Pro Max? Or do you think this is going to replace the complete iPad Pro lineup? Or do you think that Apple's replacing the 12.9-inch iPad for now and they'll get to the 11-inch size later on? Anyways, I've confused you guys enough for today, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click that notification for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out our video here in the icon above about, of course, everything you need to know in terms of rumors about the 12.9-inch iPad. And on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.